The morning sun cast golden light across the wheat fields of New Eden, as Jake Morrison stood on his office balcony, watching the harvest machines work their way through the crops. 30 years had passed since the first human colonists arrived on this world, and what they had built amazed him every single day. Rolling green hills stretched to the horizon, dotted with farms and small towns that looked like they could have been lifted straight from old Earth. Jake had been colony administrator for 8 years now, and he still couldn't believe his luck. 2.5 million people called New Eden home, and they had turned this empty planet into something beautiful. The cities gleamed with white buildings and glass towers. Children played in parks where alien trees grew alongside earth oaks. The air smelled of growing things and hope. "Sir, you need to see this." The voice belonged to his assistant, Mary Walsh, and something in her tone made Jake turn around quickly. Mary stood in his office doorway, her face pale and worried. She held a datapad in her shaking hands. "What is it?" Jake asked, walking back inside. His office occupied the top floor of the colonial government building in Haven, the planet's capital city. Through the wide windows, he could see the busy streets below where people went about their daily lives, unaware that anything was wrong. Long-range sensors picked up something big, Mary said, handing him the datapad. "Really big. Coming our way from the outer system." Jake looked at the display and felt his stomach drop. The sensor readings showed hundreds of ships moving toward New Eden in a tight formation. These weren't cargo haulers or passenger liners. The energy signatures and movement patterns screamed military fleet. "How many?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. 400 ships, sir. Maybe more. They're still too far out for a perfect count." Jake sat down heavily in his chair. New Eden had exactly 12 defense ships, and those were really just converted cargo vessels with a few weapons bolted on. Captain Bill Carter commanded them, and he was a good man, but his ships were meant for chasing off pirates and asteroid miners, not fighting a real war. "Get me Captain Carter," Jake said, "and contact Dr. Blake at the Agricultural Center. We need to start making plans." While Mary worked the communications, Jake stared out at his peaceful world. Somewhere out there, an alien fleet was coming to destroy everything they had built. He had always known this day might come. Humans had been expanding into space for almost a century now, settling new worlds wherever they found them. Not everyone in the galaxy was happy about that. 20 minutes later, Captain Bill Carter walked into Jake's office. The old spacer looked tired, his gray hair messy from running his hands through it. Behind him came Dr. Lisa Blake, the head of New Eden's agricultural research program. Lisa was young and brilliant, the kind of scientist who could make crops grow in places where nothing should live. "I've seen the sensor data," Bill said without waiting for greetings. "We're in deep trouble, Jake. My ships can't fight 400 enemy vessels. We'd last about 5 minutes." "What do we know about them?" Lisa asked, taking a seat across from Jake's desk. "Are they definitely hostile?" Jake pulled up another screen on his datapad. "We tried to make contact an hour ago. They responded with a message in broken human language. They call themselves the Hegemony, and they want us gone." "Gone?" Lisa leaned forward. "What do you mean, gone?" "Off this planet. Away from this system. They say humans don't belong here." Jake's voice was flat. "They're giving us 72 hours to evacuate everyone." Bill Carter laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Evacuate 2.5 million people in 3 days? With what ships? We've got maybe a dozen passenger liners in system, and the cargo haulers. We'd be lucky to get 50,000 people out." The room fell silent. Outside, Jake could hear the sounds of a normal day. Traffic moving through the streets, construction crews working on new buildings, children laughing in the school playground. Across the street, none of them knew that everything was about to change. "I need to contact Earth," Jake said finally. "Maybe the Colonial Defense Force can get here in time." "Earth is 3 weeks away at best speed," Bill replied. "The nearest CDF base is even further. Nobody's coming to help us, Jake. We're on our own." Dr. Blake stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city below, then at the farmlands beyond. "My grandfather died on Earth during the food riots," she said quietly. He always told my father that someday, humans would find new worlds where they could grow enough food for everyone. This planet feeds 12 star systems. Millions of people depend on what we grow here. The aliens don't care about that, Bill said. They just see humans spreading out, taking up space they think belongs to them. Jake activated his personal communicator and called Kate Sullivan, New Eden's diplomatic officer. Kate had spent years studying alien cultures and languages. If anyone could find a way to talk to these hegemony forces, it would be her. Kate arrived 30 minutes later looking worried, but determined. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. "I've been monitoring their communications," she said. "The hegemony isn't just one species. It's an alliance of 7 different alien races. They've controlled this part of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. And now they see us as a threat," Jake said. "More than that, they see us as an infection that needs to be cut out before it spreads." Kate sat down and pulled out her own datapad. "I've been studying their message patterns. This isn't a negotiation. They've already decided what they're going to do. The 72-hour warning is just a formality. So we fight," Bill said. "My crews are ready. We can't win, but we can make them pay for what they take." "With 12 ships against 400? Lisa shook her head. "That's not fighting, that's suicide." Jake looked around the room at the 4 people who had become his closest advisors over the years. These were good people, smart people, and they were all looking to him for answers he didn't have. "We start the evacuation," he said finally. "Get every transport ship in the system loaded with as many people as we can fit. Priority goes to children and families." "What about the rest of us?" Mary asked from where she sat taking notes. "We stay. We keep the colony running as long as we can. Maybe we can convince them that we're not a threat." Jake knew he was lying, but he couldn't bring himself to tell his people that they were all probably going to die. Over the next 2 days, New Eden transformed from a peaceful farming world into a planet preparing for war. Captain Carter's small fleet positioned itself between the planet and the approaching alien armada. Every available transport ship was loaded with refugees. The spaceports filled with crying families saying goodbye to loved ones who couldn't get seats on the evacuation ships. Jake spent those final hours in his office watching his world prepare to die. He sent messages to Earth, recording everything that was happening. Whatever came next, he wanted humanity to know the truth about. New Eden's last days. On the morning of the 3rd day, the alien fleet arrived. 400 warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, their hulls dark against the stars. They were beautiful in a terrible way, sleek and deadly, like sharks swimming through the void. The lead ship sent a final message. Thiao, voice was mechanical, translated by computers from some alien language Jake would never understand. "Human colony will be removed. Resistance will be met with total destruction. You have chosen your fate." Jake Morrison stood on his balcony one last time, watching the sunrise paint his world in gold and red. In a few hours, New Eden would be nothing but burning ruins and empty space. But for now, for just a few more minutes, it was still home. The alien ships came like death itself, dark shapes against the morning sky of New Eden. Captain Bill Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the defense vessel Guardian, watching the enemy fleet spread out in perfect formation. 400 warships against his 12 converted cargo haulers. He had seen hopeless battles before, but nothing like this. "All ships, this is Carter." He spoke into his communicator. "We know what we're facing. We know how this ends. But those transports need time to clear the system. Every minute we buy them is another 1,000 lives saved." The responses came back quickly from his small fleet. Voices of men and women who had signed up to protect their families and neighbors. They all knew they were about to die, but not one of them suggested running. "Guardian, this is Lieutenant Commander Pete Davis on the escort ship Defender," came a young voice over the radio. "My sensors show the transports are still loading at the orbital stations. They need at least 20 more minutes." Pete Davis was only 26 years old, an engineer who had volunteered for the Colonial Defense Force 2 years ago. His wife, Sarah, was on one of those transport ships with their baby daughter. Bill Carter closed his eyes for a moment, thinking about all the families being torn apart today. Then we give them 20 minutes, Carter replied. All ships attack formation, we go straight at them. The 12 human ships accelerated toward the alien fleet, their small engines pushing them as fast as they could go. Behind them, New Eden turned slowly in space, its blue and green surface beautiful in the sunlight. Cities sparkled like jewels on the continents below. It looked so peaceful, so perfect. The aliens opened fire first. Beams of purple energy lanced out from their lead ships, reaching across space to touch the human vessels. The corvette Brave took a direct hit and exploded in a ball of fire and metal. 11 ships left. Keep going, Carter ordered, even as his own ship shook from near misses. Make them work for it. The human ships returned fire with everything they had. Their weapons were simple compared to the alien technology, but they were built by human hands and fired by human hearts. The destroyer Swift managed to punch through an alien ship's shields and score a hit on its hull. The enemy vessel staggered, but kept fighting. Pete Davis's ship defender weaved between the purple energy beams, his young crew working desperately to keep their weapons firing. Sarah, if you can hear this, he whispered into his personal communicator. I love you. Take care of our little girl. The battle lasted exactly 18 minutes. One by one, the human ships died under the overwhelming alien firepower. The Guardian was the last to fall. Her hull cracked open like an egg, her crew scattered to the void. Captain Bill Carter died at his post, his hand still on the fire control button. But the sacrifice worked. The last transport ship jumped to hyperspace just as the Guardian exploded. 50,000 people escaped New Eden that day, carrying with them the memory of 12 crews who died to buy them time. On the planet below, Jake Morrison watched the sky burn. The alien fleet had moved into orbit, their dark ships blotting out the stars. In his office, the emergency communicator crackled with reports from around the world. Every city, every town, every farm was sending the same message. The aliens were coming. Dr. Lisa Blake was at her research station outside Haven when the first orbital bombardment began. She had refused to leave, staying behind to protect 30 years of agricultural research. Her computers held the genetic codes for crops that could feed billions of people. She couldn't let that knowledge die. The energy beam that hit the research center came from directly overhead. Lisa looked up and saw death falling from the sky, a column of purple fire that turned everything it touched to ash. Her last thought was of the wheat fields she had helped design and how they would never grow again. Ambassador Kate Sullivan died trying to send one final message to the hegemony fleet. She had locked herself in the diplomatic center, using every frequency she could find to beg the aliens to spare the civilians. Her words fell on deaf ears. The aliens had not come to negotiate. They had come to erase every trace of human presence from this world. The bombardment was systematic and thorough. The aliens targeted the cities first, turning Haven and New Manchester and Port Hope into craters of melted glass. The government buildings where Jake Morrison worked vanished in a flash of superheated plasma. He died still trying to coordinate the evacuation, his finger on the emergency broadcast button. After the cities came the farms. The beautiful wheat fields that Dr. Blake had spent her life perfecting burned under antimatter warheads. The orchards, where earth apples grew beside alien fruit trees, became smoking wastelands. The small towns where families had lived for generations disappeared as if they had never existed. The orbital stations died next. The aliens methodically destroyed every piece of human technology in the system. Solar collectors, mining platforms, communication relays. Everything that showed humans had ever been here. Space filled with debris that had once been the tools of civilization. Young Pete Davis floated in an escape pod, one of only 6 survivors from the defense fleet. His pod's tiny window faced toward New Eden, and he watched his home world die. The planet that had been blue and green and beautiful now glowed red with fires that would burn for months. The atmosphere itself seemed to be bleeding. The aliens worked for 3 days making sure their job was complete. They used deep penetration bombs to collapse the underground cities, They poisoned the rivers with chemicals that would kill any plant that tried to grow. They even targeted the orbital mirror satellites that reflected sunlight to the polar regions, ensuring that New Eden's climate would never recover. When they were finished, the hegemony commander sent a message to the rest of human space. The transmission was broadcast on every frequency, in every human language, to every colony and station and ship. Humans of the outer systems, the mechanical voice said, you have seen what happens to those who spread where they are not wanted. The world you called New Eden is now example prime. Let it be a lesson to your species. The hegemony has ruled this sector for 1,000 years. You will not challenge that rule again. 50 ships remained behind to guard the dead world, making sure no human would ever return to reclaim it. The rest of the alien fleet dispersed back to their home systems, confident that they had solved their human problem permanently. But they had made one critical mistake. In their thoroughness, in their desire to make an example, they had broadcast their crime to the entire human galaxy. Every colony, every space station, every mining platform and research base and exploration ship received the images of New Eden, burning. They saw the cities turn to glass. They saw the farms reduced to ash. They saw 2.25 million innocent people murdered for the crime of existing where aliens didn't want them to exist. Pete Davis's escape pod was picked up 6 days later by a human patrol ship. He was half dead from radiation poisoning, his mind shattered by what he had witnessed. But he lived. He lived to tell the story of New Eden's last days. He lived to describe how his friends and neighbors had died. He lived to make sure the galaxy knew what the hegemony had done. The news reached Earth 4 days later, carried by the refugee ships that had escaped the massacre. The images spread through human space like wildfire. Politicians who had never agreed on anything suddenly spoke with one voice. Military leaders who had been planning budget cuts began drawing up mobilization orders. Something had awakened in humanity that day, something that had been sleeping since the early days of their expansion into space. The species that had spent a century exploring the galaxy in peace, trading with aliens and seeking new worlds to call home, remembered what they were capable of when threatened. The aliens had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power and submission. Instead, they had taught humanity about rage and revenge. They had shown the galaxy what happened when someone destroyed a human world. Now humanity would show them what happened next. The images of New Eden burning played on every screen across human space. In the Grand Assembly Hall on Earth, President John Hayes stood before representatives from 200 human worlds, his face grim as the final moments of the colony flickered on the massive display behind him. The hall was completely silent except for the sound of people crying. They called it Example Prime, President Hayes said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. They wanted to make an example of our people. They wanted to show us what happens when humans dare to spread across the galaxy. He paused, looking out at the faces of humanity's leaders. Today we show them what happens when someone murders 2.25 million innocent people. The applause that followed was not celebration. It was the sound of a species declaring war. In his office overlooking the lunar shipyards, Fleet Admiral Roy Clark watched the refugee ships dock with the orbital stations. The old man had fought in 3 wars during his 50-year career, but he had never seen anything like this. Families torn apart, children who would never see their parents again, survivors who spoke in whispers about watching their world die. Admiral, his aide said quietly, the president wants to see you. Roy Clark was 72 years old. He had been planning to retire next year, to spend time with his grandchildren on Mars. But when he saw the footage from New Eden, when he watched Captain Bill Carter's tiny fleet die trying to buy time for the evacuees, he knew his war was not over yet. The meeting with President Hayes lasted 4 hours. They talked about numbers that seemed impossible. 700,000 warships. Every human world contributing to the largest military buildup in galactic history, an industrial effort that would transform human space into a weapon pointed at the heart of the hegemony. Can it be done? The president asked. Admiral Clark looked at the production report spread across the table. Shipyards on Luna, Mars, Europa, Titan, and 50 other worlds. Mining operations in the asteroid belts. Factories that had been building civilian goods for a century, now retooling for war production. It will take 18 months, he said. Maybe 20. But yes, it can be done. Humanity has the industrial capacity to build 700,000 ships. The question is whether we have the will to use them. After New Eden? President Hayes shook his head. Admiral, right now I think we could build 7 million ships if we needed to. Defense Secretary Amy Turner took control of the mobilization effort. She was a small woman with steel in her voice and fire in her eyes. Within a week, she had production orders flowing to every major shipyard in human space. Civilian factories received new blueprints for weapons and armor. Mining operations doubled their output overnight. The transformation was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. On Luna, the massive orbital shipyards that had built luxury passenger liners began constructing destroyers and cruisers. On Mars, factories that made farming equipment started producing military vehicles. Even the small colonies on the edge of human space contributed what they could. Dr. Carl Stone led the technology development program. He was a brilliant scientist who had spent his career studying alien artifacts recovered from ancient battlefields. Now he had a new mission: reverse engineer every piece of hegemony technology they could get their hands on. We have advantages they don't know about, he told his research team. Human manufacturing can produce goods faster and cheaper than any species in the galaxy. We just need to make sure our weapons can penetrate their shields and our armor can stop their guns. The work was dangerous. Alien technology was often booby-trapped or simply incompatible with human systems. 3 researchers died in the first month when a hegemony power core overloaded during testing. But the breakthroughs came quickly. Human shields became stronger. Human weapons became deadlier. Human ships became faster. General Nick Hayes, the president's younger brother, took charge of recruiting and training the massive armies that would be needed. Every human world was asked to contribute soldiers. Volunteers came forward in numbers that amazed even the military planners. Among the volunteers was Pete Davis, the young engineer who had survived the destruction of New Eden. He had spent 2 months in the hospital recovering from radiation poisoning, his body slowly healing while his mind replayed the images of his homeworld dying. When he was strong enough to walk, he went straight to the nearest recruiting station. "I want to join the Colonial Vengeance Corps," he told the recruiter. The Colonial Vengeance Corps was something new in human military history. These were not regular soldiers following orders from distant commanders. These were people who had lost everything to the hegemony, who had watched their families die or their worlds burn. They trained harder than anyone else. They studied alien tactics with an intensity that bordered on obsession. They were humanity's weapon of pure revenge. Pete Davis became an intelligence officer, using his knowledge of hegemony technology and tactics to help plan the coming war. He worked 18-hour days, sleeping in his office, eating military rations while studying alien communication patterns. His colleagues worried about him, but Pete had only one goal left in life: making sure the aliens who killed his world paid for what they had done. The industrial mobilization changed human space completely. Worlds that had been peaceful, farming colonies became military production centers. Asteroid mining operations expanded to feed the endless hunger for raw materials. Transport ships carried weapons and supplies between star systems in convoys that stretched for light years. The economic transformation was just as dramatic. Every human world shifted to a war economy. Civilian goods became luxuries. Entertainment industries redirected their resources toward military propaganda. Even schools changed their curricula to focus on technical skills needed for the war effort. Admiral Clark established his headquarters on Titan, in the massive military complex built into the moon's frozen surface. From there, he coordinated the largest fleet assembly in galactic history. Ships arrived daily from every corner of human space. Dreadnoughts and carriers from the core worlds. Destroyers and frigates from the industrial systems. Even converted civilian vessels armed with whatever weapons could be mounted on their hulls. The alien intelligence services watched the human buildup with growing concern. Hegemony spies reported the impossible numbers: hundreds of thousands of warships under construction, millions of soldiers in training, Entire star systems converted to military production. Some hegemony leaders began to wonder if they had made a mistake in attacking New Eden. Ambassador Veltar was the first to suggest negotiation. He was an old diplomat who had served the hegemony for 60 years, and he understood the patterns of galactic warfare better than most. The humans are not building a fleet, he warned the Hegemony Council. They are building an instrument of total war. If we do not stop this now, we may face complete destruction. But the hegemony's military leaders laughed at his concerns. Humans are weak, they said. They build machines, but they do not have the warrior spirit. When they see the true cost of war, they will surrender. They were wrong. The humans building the Great Fleet were not the same species that had peacefully colonized New Eden. The massacre had changed them. It had awakened something that had been sleeping in humanity's collective unconscious, something that remembered the wars of old Earth and the price of survival. As the 18th month of mobilization ended, Admiral Clark stood on the observation deck of his flagship and looked out at the impossible sight before him. 700,000 human warships filled the space around Titan, their hulls gleaming in the light of Saturn's rings. The largest fleet in galactic history, built by a species that had been pushed too far. Tomorrow we begin the final preparations, he told his staff. In 1 month we depart for hegemony space. We will show them what happens when someone tries to exterminate humanity. In the distance, the last ships of the Great Fleet were arriving. Humanity was ready for war. The space around Proxima Centauri had never seen anything like it. 700,000 human warships stretched across the outer system like a metallic ocean that reflected the light of distant stars. Ships of every size and class floated, in perfect formation, from massive dreadnoughts that could crack planets to swift fighters that moved like angry hornets between the larger vessels. Admiral Roy Clark stood on the bridge of his flagship, the super dreadnought UHS Retribution, watching the final ships arrive at the assembly point. The old warrior had seen many fleets in his long career, but nothing had prepared him for this sight. The largest armada in galactic history, built by a species that most aliens still considered peaceful farmers and traders. Final count, Admiral, reported his communications officer. 700,047 ships present and accounted for. All crews are at battle stations. Clark nodded slowly. 18 months of impossible work had led to this moment. Every human world had contributed ships, crews, weapons, and supplies. The industrial might of 200 star systems had been focused on a single goal, making the hegemony pay for what they had done to New Eden. Captain Lisa Ward commanded the Retribution's bridge crew with quiet efficiency. She was young for such a responsibility, only 35 years old, but she had proven herself during the border conflicts with the Centauri pirates. Her ship was the newest and most powerful vessel in the human fleet, built specifically for this war with weapons that incorporated the best of human and captured alien technology. Admiral, she said, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. President Hayes wants to address the fleet. The president's image appeared on screens throughout the massive armada. His face was older than it had been 18 months ago, lined with the stress of preparing his species for total war. Behind him stood the flags of every human world, a reminder of what they were fighting to protect. Soldiers of humanity, President Hayes began. Today you carry the hopes and dreams of our entire species. The aliens who destroyed New Eden thought they could teach us our place in the galaxy. They thought we would accept their lesson and retreat back to our small corner of space. They were wrong. In the fighter bay of the carrier UHS Vengeance, Pilot Lieutenant Commander Dan Rogers listened to the president's words while checking his ship's weapons systems. Dan had lost his brother in the New Eden massacre. His brother had been a farmer, growing food to feed a dozen star systems. Now Dan flew a fighter loaded with enough firepower to level a city. We do not fight for conquest, the president continued. We do not fight for glory or territory. We fight because 2.25 million innocent people died for the crime of existing where aliens didn't want them to exist. We fight so that no human world will ever again face what New Eden faced alone. Colonel Sam Green stood with his Marine commanders in the briefing room of the assault ship UHS Thunder. 50 million human soldiers had volunteered for this campaign, more than had ever been assembled for a single military operation. They came from every world, every walk of life, united by a single purpose, making sure the galaxy understood that humanity would not accept genocide. "The enemy thinks we are weak," Sam told his officers. "They think we build machines but lack the warrior spirit. Today we show them that they have never faced warriors like us. We don't just fight for victory, we fight for every child who died. On New Eden. We fight for every family that was torn apart. We fight so that our species will never again be seen as easy prey." Lieutenant Commander Pete Davis worked in the intelligence center of the Retribution, coordinating data from 1,000 different sources. His screens showed the latest information about hegemony fleet movements, defensive positions, and communication patterns. The aliens were starting to panic as reports of the human armada reached their home systems. "Sir," one of his analysts reported, "we're intercepting increased chatter from the hegemony capital. They're trying to negotiate." Pete looked at the decoded messages. The same aliens who had broadcast their massacre of New Eden as a warning to humanity were now sending desperate diplomatic signals, offering territorial concessions and trade agreements. The irony was not lost on him. "Too late for that," he said quietly. "They should have thought about negotiations before they turned my world into ash." Admiral Clark called a final meeting of his senior commanders. The massive holographic display in the Retribution's war room showed the target systems, each one marked with enemy fleet positions and defensive installations. The hegemony controlled over 100 star systems, but their forces were spread thin across their territory. "We divide into 7 task forces," Clark explained to his assembled officers. "Each force will be larger than most Galactic Empire's entire fleets. We hit them simultaneously across multiple systems. They won't be able to concentrate their forces against any single attack." Captain Ward studied the tactical displays. "What about their fortress worlds, Admiral? Some of these systems have defensive platforms that could give us trouble. That's why we're bringing 700,000 ships instead of 7,000. Clark replied. "We're not here to fight a fair war. We're here to demonstrate that attacking humanity has consequences that no species in this galaxy can afford to face." The alien diplomatic ship arrived 3 days before the planned departure. Ambassador Veltar, the same hegemony diplomat who had tried to warn his people about humanity's industrial capacity, came aboard the Retribution under a flag of truce. He was an old creature, his scaled skin gray with age, his eyes tired from decades of trying to prevent wars. "Admiral Clark," Veltar said through his translation device, "I come with an offer from the Hegemony Council. We are prepared to make significant concessions: territory, trade rights, reparations for the New Eden incident." Clark looked at the alien diplomat for a long moment. "Incident," he said finally. "You call the murder of 2.25 million people an incident?" "Perhaps I chose my words poorly," Veltar replied. "What I mean to say is that the hegemony is willing to negotiate. War benefits no one. War benefits the species that wins it," Clark said coldly, "and the species that learns from it. You wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power. Consider this our response to your education." The negotiations lasted 6 hours. Veltar offered everything he could think of: independent systems for human colonization, massive reparations, even the punishment of the commanders who had ordered the New Eden attack. But Clark's answer never changed. "Unconditional surrender," the Admiral said. "Complete withdrawal from all systems claimed by humanity. Total disarmament of your military forces. Those are our terms. Accept them, and your species might survive. What's coming?" Veltar left the Retribution knowing that war was inevitable. His final message to the Hegemony Council was simple: prepare for the end. The humans are not coming to negotiate. They are coming to destroy everything we have built. The Great Fleet began its final preparations. Weapons were loaded, shields were charged, and hyperspace coordinates were plotted for 7 different target systems. In the fighter bays, pilots said goodbye to family members via subspace communication. In the Marine quarters, soldiers checked their equipment one last time. Pete Davis stood in the observation lounge of the Retribution, looking out at the impossible sight of 700,000 warships preparing for battle. Somewhere in that vast armada were the instruments of vengeance for his wife, his daughter, his friends, and his world. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn what humanity was capable of when pushed beyond the breaking point. "Sarah," he whispered, thinking of his wife who had escaped New Eden with their baby daughter, "we're coming home and we're bringing hell with us." The countdown to departure began. In 12 hours, the largest fleet in galactic history would jump to hyperspace and begin humanity's lesson in overwhelming force. The aliens had wanted to make an example of New Eden. Now humanity would make an example of the entire hegemony. The hyperspace jump was the largest in galactic history. 700,000 human warships vanished from Proxima Centauri and appeared simultaneously in 7 different hegemony systems. The sight that greeted alien sensors defied belief. Endless streams of human vessels emerging from hyperspace, their weapons charged and their crews ready for war. Admiral Roy Clark watched from the bridge of the Retribution as his fleet materialized in the Kezhar system, home to the hegemony's most powerful fortress world. 100,000 human ships faced the system's defensive fleet of 800 alien vessels. The numbers told the story before the first shot was fired. "All ships, this is Admiral Clark," he broadcast to his task force. "Today we settle the debt for New Eden. Show them what happens when someone tries to exterminate humanity." The hegemony fleet at Kezhar was commanded by Admiral Zextar, the same alien who had delivered the ultimatum to New Eden 18 months ago. He had been, confident then, secure in his species' 1,000-year dominance of this sector. Now he stared at his tactical display in horror as human ships filled his sensors. "How many?" he asked his tactical officer, his voice barely a whisper. 100,000 ships, Admiral. Maybe more. Our sensors can't get an accurate count." Zextar had destroyed New Eden with 400 ships. Now he faced 250 times that number. The humans had not come to fight a battle. They had come to demonstrate the futility of resistance. The engagement lasted 6 hours. The hegemony ships fought bravely, but courage could not overcome such overwhelming odds. Human weapons, improved with captured alien technology, punched through enemy shields like they were made of paper. Alien return fire barely scratched the advanced armor of the human fleet. Captain Lisa Ward directed the Retribution's firepower against the Fortress world's orbital platforms. Each shot from her main guns vaporized defensive installations that had protected Kezhar for centuries. The planet's surface burned under bombardment from 1,000 human ships. "Target destroyed," her weapons officer reported. "All orbital defenses eliminated." "Good," Ward replied. "Signal the planet. They have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally or we begin surface bombardment." The Fortress world surrendered in 30 minutes. In the distant Example Prime system, formerly known as New Eden, Lieutenant Commander Pete Davis led the Liberation Fleet. 100,000 human ships dropped out of hyperspace to find 50 hegemony vessels guarding the dead world. The aliens had been using New Eden as a symbol of their power, a monument to what happened when species challenged the hegemony's rule. Pete looked at the burned world through the viewport of his command ship. New Eden was still beautiful in a terrible way, its continent scarred by the bombardment but recognizable to someone who had called it home. The cities were gone, reduced to glassy craters. The farms were ash. But it was still his world. Hegemony. "Fleet, this is the Human Liberation Force," Pete broadcast on all frequencies. "You have 30 seconds to surrender or be destroyed. Choose quickly." The alien commander tried to negotiate. He offered to withdraw, to leave the system peacefully, to never return. Pete listened to the desperate pleas and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "You had your chance for mercy 18 months ago," he replied. "You chose to broadcast our people's deaths as entertainment. Now face the consequences." The 50 hegemony ships died in less than 10 minutes. Human weapons fire lit the space above New Eden like fireworks, each explosion marking the end of another alien vessel. Not one enemy ship escaped to carry word of the liberation. Pete took a shuttle down to the planet's surface, landing near what had once been Haven. The capital city was nothing but melted glass and twisted metal, but he could still recognize the general layout. There, behind that ridge, had been the school where his daughter would have learned to read. Over there had been the park where he and Sarah used to walk on Sunday afternoons. He planted the human flag in the center of the crater that had once been the government building where Jake Morrison died. The flag was made of earth silk, blue and white and beautiful against the ash-gray landscape. "We came back," he said quietly. "Just like we promised." Across hegemony space, the pattern repeated. Human task forces appeared in system after system, overwhelming local defenses with impossible numbers. The aliens had spread their fleets too thin across their territory. Each human attack force was larger than the entire hegemony navy had been at the height of their power. Colonel Sam Green led the Marine assault on Hegemony Prime, the Alliance's capital world. His 50 million soldiers landed on a planet that had never known invasion, whose people had believed themselves untouchable behind their fleet defenses. The Hegemony's home fleet had been the strongest in their territory, 2,000 warships protecting their most important world. They faced 300,000 human vessels. The battle in orbit lasted 3 hours. The Hegemony fleet fought, with the desperation of defenders protecting their homeworld, but numbers and technology overwhelmed them. Human ships filled the sky above Hegemony Prime, their weapons reducing the planet's orbital defenses to scrap metal. "All resistance has ceased," reported Captain Dan Rogers from his fighter squadron. "Enemy fleet destroyed, planet defenseless." Sam Green's Marines landed on Hegemony Prime in dropships that blackened the sky. The aliens had never faced an invasion of their homeworld. Their ground forces were designed for maintaining order among their own population, not for fighting determined enemies. The capital city fell in 6 hours. Sam Green himself led the squad that captured the Hegemony Council chambers, where the alien leaders who had ordered New Eden's destruction waited, in terrified silence. "I am Colonel Sam Green of the Human Colonial Marines," he announced to the cowering aliens. "By the authority of the United Colonies of Humanity, I place you under arrest for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against sentient beings." The surrender came on the 7th day of the campaign. Hegemony fleets in over 100 systems had been destroyed or had surrendered without fighting. Their fortress worlds lay in ruins. Their capital had fallen to human marines. The 1,000-year empire that had dominated this sector of the galaxy was finished. The peace negotiations took place aboard the Retribution, with Admiral Clark representing humanity and the surviving members of the Hegemony Council representing what was left of their civilization. The terms were harsh, but not genocidal. Humanity had learned the lesson of New Eden well. Total destruction created martyrs and future enemies. The Hegemony would withdraw from all contested systems. They would pay massive reparations to the families of New Eden's victims. Their military would be reduced to a small defense force, supervised by human observers. Most importantly, they would formally acknowledge humanity's right to expand and colonize wherever they chose. "You wanted to teach us about power," Admiral Clark told the defeated alien leaders. "Consider the lesson learned. Humanity will never again accept genocide as the price of expansion. Attack one human world, and you face 700,000 ships. Remember that." The human fleet began its journey home, carrying news of total victory. Ships that had left as instruments of vengeance returned as symbols of humanity's new place in the galaxy. No alien species would ever again mistake human patience for weakness. Pete Davis remained on New Eden with a construction fleet and 50,000 volunteers. They would rebuild the world, make it beautiful again, create something even better than what the aliens had destroyed. The new cities would be monuments to human resilience. The new farms would feed not just humanity, but any species wise enough to seek friendship rather than dominance. As the first new buildings rose from the ashes of Haven, Pete stood in what would become the central square and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Sarah and their daughter were waiting for him to come home. Soon New Eden would be ready for them. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity was no longer the peaceful species of farmers and traders who could be pushed around by established powers. They were the civilization that could mobilize 700,000 warships when their people were threatened. They were the species that answered genocide with overwhelming force. And they were here to stay.